So the first thing I wanted to address is what is a normal map. So the first step in that are what are surface normals. So I always tell you guys to set your surface normals to 180 when you're modeling smooth skin stuff over and over again. And how you can think of that is if the angle was at 0, then anywhere where there's an angle would look like this. It would be really faceted. And this one's probably set, it's something under 90 because this is a 90-degree angle here. So the smoothing across here is obviously visible, even though these are the same objects. This one looks like it's more round. So here the wireframe's showing you that they're the same exact thing. And then here's your visual indicator of what the surface normals are. So if the surface angle is set to 0 degrees, then you'll see that you can think of the surface normal as a perpendicular line that comes up from the face of the normal. So this would be the face of the polygon, and this would be the normal. So whenever there's an angle, it sharply changes, and then there'll be the little line right here. If you have a higher smoothing angle, though, it's going to try to view this as a round object. So these guys in yellow are still going to be shown facing the same way, but anywhere where there's like a harsh point, so it changes from one angle to another, it's actually going to smooth that out. So with normal maps, it does a combination of both, where the face will be smoothed out overall, but then through the power of the normal map, it's going to simulate more surface detail than is actually on the object geometry-wise. So this would have 3 faces, but it would look like, again, it has 2 little bumps on this one face. So again, here's an example of a normal map. So this would just be 4 bars that are facing out, and then the text example would look like it's bumping out. So the other thing that you'll see all the time is this color of blue. If you want to bring it up in Photoshop, you can kind of think of it as half red, half green, and full blue. So, opening a new document real quick. To get this in the RGB values, we want this at half, so your max value is 255. So it would be 128 for half, 128, and 255. In other softwares, if the range is from 1 to 256, then it would be 128, 128, 256. But in this case, since it's 0 to 255, maxing out the blue is at 255. So if I was to even hit 256 and hit enter, it's going to say that it can't do it, and then it's going to automatically bump it down to 255. But then you'll get this color of blue that when filled, that's usually what the empty space or the space that doesn't have an effect excuse me, on the object is going to be filled with that color of blue. So I have a handful of examples of making normal maps. So the first thing that we're going to do is, I can't see my cursor. There we go. Is we have just this single plane and then this quote-unquote high-resolution geometry that we're going to bake to the low-resolution plane. So to do this, you're going to need a high mesh and a low mesh. So I just named these guys high and low. Both of these guys are going to need to have the little eyes visible on them. The other thing you're going to need is both objects are going to need unwraps. So this guy, which is our low, so this is the map that we want to generate, is just a plane, so it takes up the full spot because it's a perfect square. And these guys, they don't technically need an unwrap, but if they were just mashed somewhere in the 1-to-1 space and being over top of our target object, it's not going to work. So ideally, you'd either shrink this down and put it in an area in 1-to-1 space that isn't getting taken up, or you can just throw it out of the 1-to-1 space so it's just not going to get factored in to the bake. And then looking at this, this is going to be our target outcome of the normal map looking similar to this. So if I was to move the light around, it would actually change where the light source is coming from. and it would do the same thing with the normal map. So again, with both of these guys turned on and our texture selected, with the high texture being out of the 1-to-1 space, we need to, actually make sure, textures-wise what I'm dealing with. Okay. We need a image to bake the map onto, so to do that, over in clips, we do add clip, hit new image. Now we're just going to make a new image. It can be a targa. So I'll just name this the same name as the 3D file. And for quick bake times, we're just going to make these 512s. Hit OK. So now this image was created on my desktop. So looking over here, it's right here. So opening it is just a blank image. So looking back at our 3D file, turn the wireframe off so it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing. Actually, yeah. So these two objects are exactly the same. This one has a low smoothing angle, so it looks faceted. This one has a high smoothing angle, so it looks soft. So looking at these, obviously this one you can't tell where the individual polygons are. This guy is the same thing, it just has an extrusion made evenly. So if I get rid of this, it'll be easier to see. So that extrusion was just out from these sides. Hide this again, and then this guy is the same thing as all of these essentially. I just moved this vert up higher. So at this point, we want the hit 4 to go to materials, and then I'll just click on my low plane. So I named the material to match the mesh, so it's just the material's called low. I'm going to add this new image we created directly onto our low. So right now, if we were to think of this as we just added a diffuse map, there's no color in it, so it didn't change. So at this point, instead of this being a diffuse color, we're going to go down to surface shading and change this to normal, and you'll see that it kind of freaked out and it made it look a little bit different because it applied it as a normal map and it doesn't have that blue color in it at all, so it's going to look a little weird. So at this point, again, we have the low selected, the high and the low are both turned on, we have our texture map selected, and we have a texture applied to our low mesh with it set to a normal as the effect. Now if I right click here and go to bake, I'm going to get this little option. Right now you can ignore the cage, but this distance right here, what it's going to do is it's going to turn the wireframe back on so you can see it. Here. There we go. What it's going to do is it's going to project straight down until it hits this surface, and anything that's here, so obviously all this geometry, it's going to see that and then try to project all that information onto our plane. So we want the information to start reading at a bare minimum of right here because this is our highest point. So an easy way to figure out that distance, it's based on how big the objects in the scene are. So it would be from this plane right here to this point here. So I could either get the ruler tool or just grab this guy, move it up to where these 2 points meet. So this is about 10.5 inches. So we can just round up and say 11 inches. So again, right click here, bake from object to texture, and we want this guy instead of 0 inches to be 11. Hit OK. And it's going to give us this normal map. So there's two things with this. I'll go ahead and save this out. And I'll actually save it out as a JPEG. If I was to save it out as a targa, any of the empty space would be filled with an alpha. But if I save it out as a flattened image without an alpha, like a JPEG, it'll fill in all of the extra area with that 128, 128, 255 blue color. So we hit save, and then this is the image it comes up with, but the thing you'll notice, I'll bring these both up in Photoshop. these two blues don't match. So by default, if I apply this normal map, which it automatically gets applied because that's the one that I baked to, if I apply it to the scene, actually it's applying this image right here with the alpha. So I'm actually just going to right now remove this from the scene. And apply this JPEG that was just created, because that actually has this area filled in with blue instead of it being alpha. And then again, I'll change this to normal. So now rotating around this, you'll see that the light changes and it tries to simulate there being the geometry on here. This guy, again, is smooth just like the other one was, but if we go to the side, we can see that it's obviously just a plane. So ideally, I'm not going to want to try to use a normal map to put a bowl on this quote-unquote top of a table or something like that. You'd want to do it for smaller details. Like, if it was a table for the example, you'd want to use it for scratches in the table, maybe small indents here or there, or creases or seams. So again, you wouldn't want to use it for bigger geometry things, just smaller detail. But this gives you a good reading on how the stuff looks. And again, going back to our high, paying attention to just these two now. Oops. Turn the normal back on and go to the top view. If I zoom all the way in on this, you can't see where this line was. When I turn this off, you can't see anything right there as far as the pixels changing. And the same thing here, obviously there was nothing there, so it's not going to actually add anything that wasn't there. But the one thing that you might notice is the corner on this one that didn't have it has this little chunk taken out of it right here. And that's going to be the case, oops, zoomed in a little too far, on all these corners. So this one's not as noticeable, but it's still there. And this one, it's there. Same thing with this one, a little chunk taken out of a corner, chunk taken out of a corner. And this one doesn't have it. So ideally, if you're baking something to something flat, pulling this out so you have this parallel plane that matches this parallel plane. So looking at these from the side, these rays go right all the way through. It's going to handle this transition from this angle better, because instead of it on, go to the front, on this one, handling it from this drop straight down, it's handling this angle right here as opposed to an angle, a drop, and then an angle. So just as far as getting proper normal maps, that's what you're going to want to do if you want to just put something on the surface of something else. So the other thing that I wanted to address was the thing with these not being the same color blue. And the reasoning behind this is there's two different areas to get to this. The one is Moto Preferences, and on a Windows machine it'd be Windows Preferences. Color Management. So by default, every time it's going to be set to Nuke. And that's one of the Foundry's other softwares. So this, ideally, before you do any bakes, you'd want to set to None. And then make sure all this stuff's on, low selected. Do another bake. So now you can see it's that correct color of blue. Now if I was to save this image out, it would be the blue that we're looking for. So, where are we at? So now comparing these two, it's just this one looks a little bit more dark. So ideally, you could use these if you were staying in Moto, but if you're going to go to any other software, aside from Nuke with how it sets its gamma, this normal map right here wouldn't work. If you threw this in Coat, if you threw it in Unity, Unreal, there's going to be crazy seams everywhere, and it's going to look really washed out as far as a normal map goes. So you're going to want this right here. So again, using the 128, 128, 255 blue, you can compare and make sure that you have the right color space. If I go ahead and apply this other normal map, so we have the new one on there, the old one's hidden, and I'll hide the high geometry. It's a little bit more intense than it normally is because we're still in the new color space. You can actually change just the color space of the image. So down here you'll see that instead of it being the normal color blue, it's a really intense blue. So there's this, if I can't make this a little bit bigger, this property right here, image still. We're going to want to change this from default to either none or linear. And now it's displaying as normal, so just comparatively looking at this, you'll see it change when I toggle back and forth between the two. So this is displayed correctly, this is not. So again, looking at it, it should be this color of blue and not that crazy, almost primary blue. Because what that's doing is it's compensating. So when this one gets that applied to it, it turns it from this dull, toned down blue into this saturated correct blue. So again, that's just, that blue scenario is just a technicality with motive that you have to deal with. So say in the next example is actually going to be things that are concave. So again, we have this guy and this guy are really close to the same. This one's just going to have the extrusion out. So hopefully how it handles this corner will be a little bit better than the results we get right here. This one, if we look from the top, it actually isn't zoomed in at all. It's just an extrusion down, but the walls are straight, so the walls are perfectly perpendicular to the plane that we're baking to. And this one's the same thing, it's just smoothed out, so I beveled it right here. So again, the high and the low are both turned on. Go ahead and double check our UVs real quick. So this has the correct unwrap we want. This is out of here, so it's not going to interfere with anything. Currently don't have an image. Again, we'll set this to a 512. And the other thing is there's a color space down here that you can set to linear, so there's multiple places to get to that. And then the low, we'll go ahead and apply this target we just created. Set it to a normal. And then go ahead and bake. Again, it's going to ask us for the distance. I forgot to check that. This guy is a little bit lower than the other one, so we could probably still use our 11-inch distance, but just checking, bring it up to there. So just over 3, so we can set it to 4 and it should be good. Dun, 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 dun. So bake to texture from object. Set this to 4 inches to be safe. So again, just looking at this, we can see that the corners on this one and this one are a little bit wrong. This one's okay. Again, this is our smoothed out one. This is our non-smoothed out one. But that one where the walls were perfectly perpendicular, it couldn't see those walls because the arrows, like the light rays, were shooting straight down. So if it's shooting straight down on a wall that's going straight up, it can't see it. So if you were to just scale the wall in a little bit, ideally it's just going to have these same corresponding colors, but they're just going to be, in a sense, smaller. And then again, this one's the same thing. It's just smoothed out where that transition was. So again, really similar results. It's just the colors that you're going to see on this guy are a little bit different than these colors just because of the corresponding colors saying what way's up, what way's down, whatever. So this one's poking out, whereas this one's kind of poking in. So in a sense, looking at this one, it's teal on the top, purple on the bottom. This one's purple on the top and teal on the bottom. So it's just the colors are kind of inverted because, or I guess reversed, because we're having an object that's going down instead of coming up. And say in this example, wise is going to be slightly more practical. So if we wanted, let's say, a vent, a screw, a bolt, or this little widget, which like in metal it could be used to like reduce cooling or something like that, it would be the same process. So let's go through this real quick and make sure everything's set up correct. So this one, the unwrap, isn't good on this. It's going to be interfering quite a bit with our one underneath. So I don't need anything fancy. I'll just do a project from view, move these out of the way, throw them over here. So again, having our low selected, make sure this is the geometry we're going for. Use the same targa. Set it to a normal and bake. Distance-wise, we should be good at 8 inches. So looking at this, you can understand the screw, the head of it, was parallel to the body here, so it's not actually showing any normal information there. And the same thing with this screw here. It's any of the faces, same with this one, this here, any of the faces that are parallel to what it's getting baked to will show up just as the blue color, and anything else that's getting affected will show up as all the other colors. Oops. Hold off on that one. So this is a quick example of, we have a 6-sided box that we're baking a high poly cube to. So this cube, it's just the edges were beveled. So these are different results that you get. Ideally, this one looks the most correct. Actually zoom in on this and look at these one at a time. So again, this is our high poly target, so this is more looking at things in a third dimension as opposed to just baking things onto a plane. If I was to bake this onto a cube, results-wise, not paying attention to the stuff down here yet, so this one looks correct. This one, you can see if I zoom in a little bit better, it's got, the smoothing's kind of okay, but it's got some seams. This one's got weird warping to where it feels almost like the cube is kind of mushed in, like it's an ice cube, and it has the seams as well. And this one just kind of has more of the mushed in feel and not as much of the seams going on. So looking at what's happening unwrap wise, oops. So this, they did the typical unwrap, but then they split the islands into different pieces. And if I was to be painting on this, ideally I'd want these guys to be unwrapped something more like this so I could paint across one surface to another in Photoshop. But with how normal maps work, when you have a harsh angle, sometimes it's better to split things up. So this one, not only is it split up, but it also has separate smoothing groups. So looking at this cube instead of it, go ahead and increase the smoothing on this real quick. So at first you might think, since this cube right here is smooth all the way around, to bake this, our low poly, we'd want a cube kind of like this, since it has the smoothing everywhere. But actually that's not the case. You'd actually want to split these up into different poly groups. So you could either, you could split it into different poly groups, or you could crank this angle down so each one of these kind of has its own. But looking at this, if I was just to grab one and make it its own poly group, Now you can see from here it's got all the smoothing, but this edge right here is crisp all the way around. So I could technically go through and make each one of these its own polygroup. And again, to do that, it's under Geometry, Polygon, Set Smoothing Group. We can just name this Side. Grab this one, do the same thing. Set this one to Side as well. Name it whatever we want, and then it has the same smoothing. But realistically, you only want to do that if it's something that needs to be controlled, something like this, where it's just a Boolean of I need everything to be a lower angle. Your best bet is to just drop the angle. But again, there's a bunch of different factors when it comes into desired results that you're looking for. But again, looking back at this, they had this have different smoothing groups. The UVs, they split up the islands. This one, they didn't split up the islands, but they had the separate smoothing group, so it does look a little bit better. But this right here seam is where one of the unwraps were. So that would be the two problem areas are going to be, zoom in a little bit more, right here and right here, because there's going to be like one pixel where it's kind of blending these two colors together, and ideally you don't want that. So if we split these groups up, it has the correct color that goes all the way out and has the padding that I was talking about. So the thing that you drastically want to avoid with almost all normals is having these crazy color gradients everywhere. So these are what's going to make it look like a melty ice cube. So if you're doing anything hard surface or sometimes even organic stuff, having crazy rainbow colors in a normal map is usually a bad thing. So if it's a flat surface like this, ideally you want a flat surface to just be the normal map blue color and not look anything like this. So these ones are just 100% wrong. So these, they have the one smoothing group, and then UVs are split, UVs are not split. So these just look identically horrible almost. It's just this one is going to result in a little bit worse seams. So the next thing, making this a little bit more advanced, is if you were to do something like this, ideally for this bumpy shape going across here, so it would just be like for the plastic grip area, making this in real life, that'd be a machined thing that would be easy to do, but modeling this, you're not going to want to model a million little diamond-shaped things over and over and over again and have them curve around the surface and whatnot. So ideally we could unwrap this section, it wraps here all the way around to the other side, unwrap that as one straight square. And then as far as making the normal map goes, and close this guy, we could do something along the lines of this low poly would represent the square that we want to have, and this high poly would be, turn the wireframe on so you can see what this is, it would have that texture on it. So since this guy is a rigid thing that's not going to move, we could easily make this pattern in 3D flat and then wrap it around a surface, and that's not going to give you any issues whatsoever. And the other good thing is it's wrapping from itself into another object. If it was wrapping just around a cylinder, chances are you're going to get a seam where it matches up. So your best bet, if you don't want to deal with making that seam perfect, is just tuck it away on the bottom or someplace that's not going to be seen. But this one, ideally, all these seams, it goes into a different hard edge. So having a seam on this area is actually ideal. So we'd actually unwrap that separate, give it the separate normal map, and then paint it separate. So again, just going over this process one last time on a flat surface at least. High and low, both meshes turned on. This unwrap isn't going to work, so we'll just do project from high, shrink it down, throw it over here. The low actually doesn't have an unwrap currently, so we'll just project from view, and that, since it's a square, it just fills the area perfectly. Never gave this guy a new material, so I'll give it a new material called low. Use this same target we've been using. And then do bake from object to texture. Distance-wise, I actually have no clue what this is distance-wise, so I'll just double check real quick. So 2.5 inches. So I'll show you real quick what happens if you don't give it enough distance. So let's just give it a distance of 1 inch. Oops, didn't set it to a normal map. Try that again. So it starts baking it, but then it cuts off at the top, so you can see that it just made more of a weird diamond shaped. But if I go ahead and increase this to 3 inches so it covers the whole extent, it'll have all these come to points. And then again, I can set this guy to linear, and it'll be how we want it. But again, this, even though I baked this out at 1:1, I could save this image out. Now let's say I had a new texture. Oops. In Photoshop, I can grab this and say, okay, I only needed this many set of diamonds, so go ahead, delete this, and just move this island wherever I want. The one thing to caution when doing normal map stuff in Photoshop is this is fine as long as I can move it wherever I want. I can scale it up and down. It really doesn't matter. The only thing that I can't do is rotate it. That usually will have adverse effects sometimes on things like this that's projected down flat. It won't be the end of the world, but in a sense, go ahead and zoom in on this. And go to just the green channel. It's reading this light color as this being the top and this being the bottom. So if we actually took this and rotated it, should I go back to this? 180 degrees. And if we were to bring this into a game engine or whatever, instead of these diamonds popping out, since I rotated it, it's now seeing this as the top. So it would actually be these diamond shapes would be going in. So again, rotating stuff is a little bit wonky, and then rotating at 90 degrees again would confuse it on what way it thinks is up, down, left, or right. So looking at these any ways individually, if you can't tell by looking at the RGB, transform that back, which way is up and down. Normally the cyan color is the top, and the dark purple, darker areas are going to be the bottom. But if you have trouble figuring out that, if you go to channels and just click the green channel, it'll be a black and white image that sometimes is easier to read than looking at all the colors combined. Do some cleanup real quick. So the last thing I wanted to do was opening slowly. Open. There we go. Turn this off. So ideally, just to go over the workflow one more time, if you were going to use ZBrush or something like that, the first thing that you're going to want to start with is your high poly object, and this is again going high to low, which is the most common workflow nowadays. You're either going to sculpt something like this in ZBrush, or if it's something hard surface like a high detailed gun, you're going to model like an extremely high detailed gun, bring that in, and then normally for something organic like this, you do retopology and coat or whatever that I've showed before. But something that's not organic and constructed, like a gun or something like that, you're actually going to want to just remodel that as a low poly version. because usually like guns, toilets, all that stuff, you're going to want to have straight lines, perfect circles, and all that stuff. So really with retopology tools, you're not going to get that as easily as just dropping in cylinders when you need cylinders. But ideally what we're going to do here is, this is our high, turn that off. This is our low, so just looking at the density of the wireframes, low here, high here. We're going to bake all this information onto the low. So again, our high has, excuse me, nope, this is going to take a bit. I'm actually going to stop the recording and move this high texture out of the 1-to-1 space. Okay, now that the high poly unwrap is moved out of 1-to-1 space, excuse me, give it a second. Go ahead, now we have the low. So this guy should be fine. Nothing on this guy's mirrored at all. So I don't think, nope. So again, just a quick breakdown. It's probably pretty self-explanatory, but the main part of his body's here, head, leg. This is inside of the mouth and a bunch of the teeth. Tail's here, collar's here, ears and feet. So again, we're going to want to turn both of these meshes on, have the low selected, actually give the low a new material, call it low. And bake this guy. This one, the distance, I'm actually not sure of, so just guess. I'm pretty sure it has to be higher, but if not, it'll show up wrong. Actually, pretty sure I forgot to switch it to normal. Yes, I did not switch it to normal, and autosave gets me again. So that's one bad thing about autosave. If you have a lighter file, it can do that all day long. And just autosave. If you have a heavier file like this, autosave is going to pop up and slow you down. So again, try rebaking this real quick. Go ahead and pause the video. So distance-wise, there's a few spots that were off. So need to increase it a little bit more. Try this again. And I'll know that the distance is off because when it starts rendering this guy out, there'll be pretty much, if you look at the hips area right here, there'll be areas that are black that shouldn't be black, which is right here and here. And then there's a little bit on the foot. But again, for this, we'll call that good. Ideally, I'd want to go ahead and save this out first. Ideally, I'd want to go into that problem area and see where this distance is, the difference, and then just kind of either use the ruler tool or move this out and figure out. So I was at 22, it wasn't working, so I just need to pop that up a little bit more. But again, this specific spot right here might not be the problem area. Again, you can just keep popping that distance up. You can actually go significantly higher than you think you should be able to, and it usually works out fine as far as distance goes. But hide this and reapply our new normal map to this guy. Set it to normal. Get rid of this. So again, we can see all this detail in the dog with it being a low poly. The other thing is seams were around these areas. They're not showing up right now. Right now I'm working in Nuke's color space though. So if I was to take just this color blue, and this is a good way of testing out to make sure that your color space is correct. Like if your normal map keeps having seams and you're not sure why, you can actually just grab this blue, throw it on as a normal map, and then I'm going to drop the Fresnel so it doesn't have that crazy intense backlight. But you can see that just filling it in with a blue, there shouldn't be normals or seams anywhere, and right now anywhere where there's a seam, it's showing up as there being a seam, so you can pretty much see exactly how I unwrap this guy. This means that, again, that your color space is wrong and it's not your normal map that's wrong if you are getting those seams. So again, in this circumstance, take this guy, the name of your image itself, go to image still right here, and you can change this to linear, and it should fix that issue right away. And again, I baked out technically an improper normal map if I was to use this in another software. So again, we could either set that color to linear before we saved it out, turn this back on, or again, why? Okay, it's not letting me go to the preferences, but you go to Modo. Oops. Now it is, I guess. That's weird. So Modo Preferences, Color Management. Take this, change it from nuke/default to none. And then I could just re-render this out. And sometimes it's good to actually go in after you change the color settings to clear out the image associated with what you're going to bake, and then reapply it. Rechange this to normal. Now go ahead and bake it. We'll pop this up to, let's say, 32, see if it takes care of it. Oops. I do not have the high dog turned on, so it just tried to bake a normal map. It filled it in entirely with blue, and that's because it didn't have anything to reference. So we turn on the second mesh, try it again. Again, give it a second to calculate stuff. Now you can see it's coming in at the correct color. So again, we save this guy out. Now actually, save it out as a PNG as well. Go away. So turn this off, apply the correct normal map now. So now this normal map would look correct in any other software. I change it to normal. It initially looks weird, but again, that's because down here it's coming in at that intense blue. So at this point on the image still, we just want to change this color space to linear, and then it shows up how it correctly would. So again, anything else? Not save this. I'll actually show another quick example of a high poly hard surface. Oh, where are we at? So this guy will have some weird materials I'll have to clear off of it. So something like this, if you were going to do like armor, again a weapon, anything hard surface, you'd want to actually model it out in high detail like this. So ideally a model like this isn't going to be in a game. Like this right here, all these little guys are, let's just go and hide this. They're all just separate posts that got put in here. because on Glocks that's just how the grips work. So this would be something more akin to this as far as geometry goes. It probably wouldn't even need to be this dense. Something like this would be fine. And then these would just be a normal map that would be applied to it. So ideally, you would model the high poly version of this, and then go in, use this as reference to model the low poly, and then use this, and probably like one piece at a time like this one is made, bake out the normals one piece at a time, and then composite all those together in Photoshop. So again, chances are you're never going to just hit the bake button once and your bake is going to be perfect. A lot of times certain aspects of it will be good with certain settings, so you have to change the settings. So other things will be good, other things will be bad, so you have to grab the good from each bake, composite those together, and then hopefully your outcome will be something that's acceptable and that you like. But again, normal maps are something that get really, really complicated the more you get into them. So the one thing I would refer to almost religiously is the polycount wiki. It has a pretty insane amount of stuff about normal maps. But again, if you have any problems, either ask me with stuff if you're doing anything with normals, or again, referring to the internet. There's a ton of sources out there, and everything under the sun's been normal mapped, so chances are whatever problems you have, somebody else has already dealt with and could address. But again, that's kind of the slightly more advanced but still short version of how normal maps work and how they get applied to things.